Thank you. Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our financial aid. Welcome to people who are watching from home and to people who are here. Thank you for coming. We're super excited to have Dr. Nealon here with us today, presenting on financial aid. As some of you may know, the FAFSA is changing for this year, so we thought it was super important to bring her here to give you all the updated information, not only for financial aid in general, but in particular for this year and all of the newness that is out there. So I guess without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Dr. Nealon, who you guys are here to see.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Nealon. This will be a little weird for me to be looking at the computer and at you at the same time. So just forgive any awkwardness that may come up. I'll get used to it as the night goes on. The last time I saw Mrs. Mueller, was probably how many years ago? So it's fun to be back here, and it's fun to see what the changes have been. I have been in financial aid and admissions. I've been a vice president for enrollment, marketing, and communications at a whole bunch of different schools for about 25 years. But my best experience came from my 3 kids. And my last one just graduated in May. So I'm officially done. Yay! It doesn't mean I'm any richer because they still need money and they still need everything. But I'm here to tell you that there is life after you go through all this. Just so that I understand, I know there's people online that I can't see, and that's okay. How many of you in the audience are first time sending their kids to college? Okay. Anybody, and you I know have an older one. Great. So the good news is nothing that I'm going to say tonight is rocket science. Every single thing that we're going to talk about here, you can find online, simple Google search, or just go to some basic financial aid sites. That's why I don't give out a ton of handouts. This presentation is going to be pretty straightforward and pretty basic. For me, the key is to help people feel comfortable with the vocabulary and understand sort of how does all of this work. It's really not hard, but it's intimidating, especially if you're going through it for the very first time. So what we're going to cover today is what is financial aid? How do I go about getting it? How much can I get? How do I actually apply for it? How do the colleges figure out how much I'm actually eligible to receive once I do fill out this financial aid form? And then what happens next? Does that sound like a good plan? Good, because I don't have a backup plan. That's all I have for all of us. So like I said, it's pretty straightforward. Financial aid comes from 4 primary sources. Comes from the federal government, the state government, the institutions themselves, and then a whole wide variety of scholarships, funds, and other sources that are out there. We're going to spend probably most of our time talking about federal aid and the institutional aid itself. That's where we'll spend most of our time talking, but just to let you know that there is other aid out there. The federal government offers 3 basic types of aid. The first is called a grant, and it's the most popular kind of money. Anybody know why? It's free. You don't have to pay it back. Of course it's popular. Everybody wants free money that they don't have to pay back. Of course, it is among the more difficult money to qualify for because you have to demonstrate financial need and not necessarily what you and I think we need, but what the government says that we need. And that's also one of the big changes for this coming year is how the government is going to figure out need and what counts and what doesn't. They are changing that calculation for this year. So grants are monies that don't have to be paid back. Work study is exactly what it sounds like. Your kid gets a job on campus in exchange for pay. They get a paycheck usually every 2 weeks, and they make good money, 15, 16, 17 bucks an hour. It's like anything else. The more they do it, the better they are, the more money they earn. Now, when my oldest son was going off to college, I actually, as a first-time mom going through this, thought maybe he shouldn't work in his freshman year. Like, he works over the summers, he saves up his money, he does his thing, but you know what? Let him be a first-year kid. So he was good. He saved up lifeguarding money and all kinds of money, and he went with a bank account, his and a little bit of mine. By October, that money was gone, and I couldn't get money to him fast enough. So he did ultimately have to go and get a part-time job. And all 3 of my kids ultimately did that. I'm here to tell you, if your kids are gonna work study is not something to be overlooked. The reason I say that is a few reasons. One, they can't work more than 20 hours a week when they work study. That's because we know they're students first and employees second. So if your kid comes to their supervisor and says, Jackie, I can't work tomorrow because I have a 15-page paper due, I'm going to say, no problem, you don't have to come in, but I'm going to lecture him just like you would, like why do we wait till the night before to write a 15-page paper and all of that, but I can't fire him. Whereas Macy's or Taco Bell or wherever kids work can stop putting them on the schedule. They can also put them on for too many hours, especially at times of years like this. This is right now on college campuses, final season at the end of the semester. So they're being pulled to work extra hours at the same time as they're being pulled to study and at the same time as they're pulling to take advantage. So work study, though, doesn't come off the top of tuition. So what do I mean? Let's say a college costs $10,000 a year. Let's just pretend that such a place exists. We'll go to a happy place for a minute. And your child gets $2,500 or $3,000 in federal work study money. That doesn't mean that the government is going to only charge you $7,000 for that. The school's only going to charge you $7,000. They don't know that your child's going to get a job, that every time she gets a paycheck, she's going to come and pay her tuition bill with it. So I like to tell families to think of work study money like movie money, pocket money, book money, transportation money. But colleges are in the business of looking as affordable as humanly possible to you. So we like to mail you award letters that say, this is how much we cost. Look at all this good stuff we're giving you. And we subtract work study off the top. And you might not realize that that's money that has to be laid out and your child has to ultimately earn it back. So to me, one of the most important things for us to talk about, and we will, is how to decode those letters. How not to get hung up on a dollar amount, but how does that dollar amount work? And does it get repeated? And do I have options? And that's what we'll talk about. So work study is not bad, but it's not as good as grant. And then there's the four-letter word of a loan, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But none of us hope that our kids graduate with loan debt, but the majority of our kids at some point during their study will have a loan in their name. So whether they do it first year or somewhere near the end, they're definitely going to need to go on to graduate school at some point. That's another time that students jump in. So it's good to learn what those loans are all about. So let's talk about the Pell Grant just a little bit more. Everything I'm talking to you about is for the current year, students that are in college right now in 23, 24. We don't know exactly what it's going to be in 24, 25, but it doesn't vary that much. It's going to be roughly what we're talking about here. Now, the Pell Grant, which you qualify for through the financial aid form, you're eligible to receive up to a maximum of just shy of $7,400. So that's not chump change. It's good money if you can get it, and a kid can get anywhere from $50 up to that $7,400 in grant money. The only requirement is that you demonstrate need. But again, as we said, it's determined by the cost of the college that your kid goes to and how much money you have and how the government thinks you can stretch that to work. So you might get a Pell Grant, a large Pell Grant at one school, and get a smaller Pell Grant at another school. How does that work? Well, if one college costs $50,000 a year and you qualify for Pell, they're going to be able to fit maybe the whole $7,400 in there. But if the other college you've chosen is, let's say, Nassau Community College, you're not going to get $7,500 there. You're going to get a much lower amount because it's going to meet your need, and so on. So I just don't want you to think that the schools are being tricky. If one school offers you a federal grant in one amount and then another school offers a slightly different amount. Everything is sort of a mixed puzzle between your resources, your child's resources, how much the college costs, and then it goes from there. So work study depends, like we were talking about, it comes from the school. Colleges love work study because we get paid back for every dollar we pay the kid. So we get cheap labor, your kid gets a job, and the government can feel like it's helping people. Win, 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 all the way across the board. But when we run out of work-study money, we can't ask for more. And then we have to go into our own pockets to hire students, and that's a little bit harder. So when we talk about deadlines and the importance of filling out the FAFSA in a timely way, this is just one example of a kind of fund that runs out. And you don't want to find out that you would have been eligible for something if only you had gotten it in by the deadline. This is the big guy. This is the federal loan. And the first loan that we're going to talk about, what you're seeing up there on the screen, this is in your child's name. You as parents, you're not a co-signer. You don't have to give them any collateral. They don't need any collateral. They don't need a job. This is what's known as the Federal Stafford Student Loan. And so every kid in America, Bill Gates's kid, can get the Stafford loan. In the freshman year, they get $5,500. In the sophomore, $6,500. And in each of the junior and senior years, they get $7,500 each year. So you notice the amounts are going up slightly as they get closer to graduation, but these are not astronomical amounts. And yet we read or we hear all the time that kids are graduating from school steeped in debt that they can't get out from under. That's true, but that's not from this loan. It's when they start supplementing this with additional loans, private loans, plus loans, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which are parent loans. That's where it happens. These loans, by design, are meant to be manageable for a student to be able to pay back. A good rule of thumb that I like to use is your child, as a general rule, should not graduate from undergraduate school with more loan debt than they're likely to earn in their first year working. So what does that mean? Most kids graduating from college today are going to earn anywhere from $45,000 to $60,000, right? Depends on what they're going to study, where they're going to study. If they're engineers, it might be more than that. If they're social workers, it might be less than that. It really just all depends on what they're going to do. So if a kid, let's just say, is earning $50,000 and has borrowed all that they needed to here, which is roughly like $35,000, $40,000 through this Stafford loan, they're going to be able to make those monthly payments very easily and still be able to save up for a car and save up to live on their own and so forth, because they get 10 years to pay this loan back, which is nice. So they're not paying it back in a giant lump sum. It's a manageable amount for the student to pay back, and then they can move forward. But if a kid graduates with $90,000, $100,000 worth of debt, which isn't unheard of, there are people that do all of these kind of secondary loans with their kids and is only going to have a job for $45,000 or $50,000 a year, every penny that that kid earns is going to go towards paying that loan debt off, and then they're going to live in your basement for the rest of your life. So if your plan is to get them out of your basement and to get them out on their own 2 feet, then you want to keep the loan payments within reason. The interest rate on this loan is 5.5% right now. It's variable. Its cap is 8.25%, hasn't been that for years. So I expect in the 24-25 year, it should be about this as well. Now, this loan comes in 2 flavors, subsidized and unsubsidized. In a subsidized loan situation, the government says to your kid, here, take this money, go learn something. You don't pay any principal, you don't pay any interest while you're in school. Then when you get out, you get a 6-month grace period, hopefully to get a job, and then you get up to 10 years to pay it back. So that's a nice thing. Anything, by the way, that the child pays back during that 6-month grace period, she or he will never pay interest on. So even my families that have a little savings account that they've been saving up for their kids, it's not earning a ton of money for us, but if your child does qualify for a subsidized Stafford loan, some families say, you know what, I'll keep our money liquid and I'll help them on the back end if I want to help them on the back end. I'm not suggesting, I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm just sort of filling you in on what some families choose to do. Now, Bill Gates's kid is going to get the Stafford loan, same loan amounts, same 10 years to pay it back. But the government's going to say to Bill Gates's kid, you can afford to pay interest while your child is in school. And that's called an unsubsidized Stafford loan. So the only difference between subsidized and unsubsidized is when does interest start being due, right? And you're going to see, again, for the same thing that we talked about with Pelt, you might get subsidized in one place and then half and half in another place, again, having to do with the cost and how far your money can stretch at each of those places. But either way, if there is such a thing as a good loan, this is what's offered to our students. The next thing is really scary. So this one is for us parents. This is called the Parent Loan for Undergraduate Study, or PLUS loan. And this is a loan that we borrow in our name. Kids are not co-signers. We don't need collateral. We do have to have a decent credit score, not the best credit score, but a decent credit score in order to get it, but there's no income cutoff for it. So they'll give this loan to people pretty easily. What's scary about it is that they let us borrow up to the entire cost of education minus any aid that the kid receives. So let's say a school costs $40,000 and your kids scrape together $10,000 worth of stuff. They're going to let you borrow $30,000 a year for all the years that your kid is in school. If you have other kids, they're going to let you do that for them too. So that's why I put a snowball up there, because it starts real small, and by the time it hits the bottom, it's huge. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how do you know how much is too much to borrow as a parent. But the interest rate is currently on this puppy about 8%. So it is higher. Its cap is 9%, so it's hovering closer to its cap. I don't know what it'll be for 24, 25, but I don't expect it'll be much different from this. It's so obvious on a night like tonight. Don't borrow more than you can afford to pay back. No kidding, right? It's obvious. Where it stops being obvious is when your kids start bringing home acceptance letters from places that you know in your heart are game changers for them, right? Or at least you believe that. And so the thought as a parent, when we've been, I don't want to say torturing them, but encouraging them for all of these years, work hard, do your best, keep it up. I want you to go to college. That's your end of the bargain. This is my end of the bargain. The thought of looking our kids in the face and saying, I'm so proud of you, but I can't afford to send you where you want to go, hurts in a pit of the stomach that we didn't even know we had. So parents are tempted to say, you know what? I am not going to be the reason my daughter can't go to that school. I'm not going to, I promised, and I'm going to make this work somehow. I'm going to stand on the edge of the cliff, and I'm going to hope that the PLUS loan is the parachute that opens. I'll borrow now, and I'll figure it out later. Obviously, that's dangerous for us to do, because worse than looking your kid in the face and saying, I can't afford to send you, is I can't afford to send you back. And it's usually after a year or so that families start realizing, wow, this is a big, big stretch on our finances. So how do you know how much you can afford and you can't afford? How do you know how much you can borrow and how much you can't borrow? It's going to vary family to family. What I think is affordable might be very different from what your family thinks is affordable. It's about making sure that you have lots of options in that space. I personally, I know your guidance office here helps your kids to select schools that are safety schools, right? That no matter what, whatever school they get into, they can go to college. They're going to be admitted there. Then there are some middle of the road ones where they don't have every criteria, but they're reasonably possible to get in. And then there are like reach schools where the dean of admissions has to be in a really good mood the day they get your kid's application. Your financial strategy is the same. You need a few schools that no matter what, you know you can look your kid in the face and say, I can send you to college if you want to go to college. Or the kid can do it himself if he wants to go to college. And then there are some schools where you think there's some money out there and maybe you'll be able to pull something together. And then there are schools that are just astronomical in price. And I'm not saying not to apply to those. George Washington, this university this year, I think it hit $120,000 a year. I don't know if they did online, but nobody gasped in the room here. So am I the only one that thinks that's a lot of money? Okay, good, because that's a lot of money. If that sounds like something that's going to freak you out, the key is not to have every college on your kids' list freak you out, right? We don't want a list of 10, 15 schools that we know in our heart is probably not practical for us to be able to send them. And these are tough conversations. I had to sit with all three of my kids differently and talk about what I could and couldn't afford to be able to send them. The way I did it in my brain was I figured SUNY's a given, right? They're going to go, I want to be able to send them to SUNY and maybe go away to SUNY. And how much is that roughly going to cost me? $30,000, let's say. We'll talk more about that in a minute. For room and board and the whole kit and caboodle. So my conversation with my kids was, listen, if a school costs more than $30,000, you've got to find scholarship, you've got to work, you've got to figure it out. Like, I'll help, and then you get there. They did, some didn't. Some they just applied to because they just wanted bragging rights to say they got in. The challenge is we don't want to say no to our kids, but the hard work happens at the time that they're applying to schools, not after. After they have 10 acceptances in their hand, it becomes really hard to whittle it down and to let price stand in the way. Now, you guys are not going to like me for what I'm about to say. People on Long Island never believe me, but I'm going to tell you, it almost doesn't matter where your kid goes to college. There, I said it out loud. It almost doesn't matter where your kid goes to school. Right? What matters is that they go to college. That is, without a doubt, over their lifetime earnings, and the kids even live longer. People live longer with a college degree than without one, right? So I'm not saying that college isn't important, but I'm saying there are 4,500 plus colleges in this country. All of us in this room could probably name about 20, 25 off the top of our head. And we've been tricked into thinking that those 25 are the only ones that our kids need to get into. And if we say at a parent-teacher night, or we say in the grocery store that our kids got accepted and are going to a school that's not as recognizable, that's a pride thing on parents' behalf. I have to explain my school. I have to explain where that is sometimes. Now, that's not to say that Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, kids that can go there, if they can afford to go and they are admitted to go, they should go. I mean, there are definitely doors that open through some of the schools, right? I'm not naive. I'm just saying that not everybody gets that pass through that door. I didn't have it. I don't know how many of you had it, but we're doing okay. I got my Ivy League education for my doctorate when I knew what I wanted to do, when I knew how that degree was actually going to help me, and I understood what the return on the investment was. As an undergraduate, who knows? It would have been silly to invest that. And there are a lot of families that will pay $55,000, $60,000 a year for a child that's unclear about what they want to study. That's a very expensive time to get to know themselves. So I say this here not to be preachy, but just to let you feel free to think that cost is a factor, and you can say it out loud because everybody's thinking this, everyone. And two, that our kids, they don't always understand that there are plenty of schools. If you go to Hofstra for the National Counselors Association College Fair, did anybody ever do that here, right? You walk around at all the tables. You can't get near a SUNY table. It's backed up forever because everybody wants that. You can't get near Hofstra, you can't get near Post, you can't get near all the ones that we know. You can't get near Delaware, can't get near Michigan, can't get near Ohio. These are the places where Long Island kids go. And yet, there are schools there from Oklahoma, there are schools there from Georgia, there are schools there from all over. Why would they send a representative to come all the way to Long Island to recruit? Why? They want Long Island kids, and they're going to be motivated through scholarship to really help you choose them. A school like a Harvard doesn't have to incentivize you, and they don't, right? Schools that are high demand for our kids, they are in the driver's seat more so than not. So sometimes choosing a school that's maybe not number one, But number two might help you, or a little bit geographically different than what you were thinking. I'll get off my soapbox now. TAP, this is a short conversation. This is all the state offers us. It's called the TAP grant, Tuition Assistance Program grant, and it's free money that doesn't have to be paid back. This time it's coming from New York State instead of from the federal government. The maximum on it is, roughly $5,600. So a kid can get anywhere from $50 up to $5,600 in free money. What's nice about this is you're only in competition with other New Yorkers. So with the federal money, like Pell, they're comparing us across the country. So a family of four living here in Lynbrook on $150,000 a year is living very differently than a family of four living on $150,000 a year in Kansas, right? But it's a federal formula, and we don't get to really weigh in about that. Whereas with New York State, even though there are pockets of New York State that are way less expensive than Long Island, I see a lot of families, even just getting a piece of TAP is nice. The only other requirement is your child has to attend a college in New York State. So obviously SUNYs and CUNYs work, but any school located in New York State will work. And that's because it's coming out of state taxes over the years, and so the state needs to keep the money in the state. The schools, oddly enough, in my opinion, are the biggest place to get money. And it's the hardest to decipher and figure out. The colleges themselves give money. Publics and privates do it. They just do it very, very differently. You're going to be doing a lot of research on each of these schools, and you're going to be talking about whether or not they give scholarships and grants, and we call that need blind money, right? It has nothing to do with if you need money. Your kid has academic talent, athletic talent, musical talent, artistic talent. Your kid has a quality that school really values, and so they want to show you how much they value it by giving your child a scholarship. That's awesome money to get. And a question to ask is, are there any additional applications? Are there auditions? Are there portfolios? These are the questions. When kids come up to us at a college table, they don't know what to ask us. Sometimes parents don't know either. And so sometimes they'll ask what majors we have. There's a major board right here. But what they can ask is, what kind of scholarships? Do I need to fill out an application? What are those deadlines? Is it renewable every single year? That kind of stuff. So if you could help them ask those questions, it'll be more meaningful for them. And then colleges also have need-based awards, mostly private schools. So if a school costs $40,000 a year, and the government thinks you can afford, say, a school that only costs $10,000 a year, if a private school doesn't help you with something, we know you can't afford it. Now, we don't necessarily fill the whole gap, but we might say, listen, here's a grant, or here's a little bit of money that you don't have to pay back that's going to help you along the way. That's going to vary from school to school. Some schools will look at need related to that. Some schools have other criteria related to it. State schools don't really give scholarships. What do I mean? A good scholarship at a SUNY school is about $1,000 a year, $1,500 a year. Makes sense. It only costs about $600 to $8,500 a year, $6,000 to $8,500 a year if you're not living on campus. So they can't give you a $5,000 scholarship. The state would go more bankrupt than it already is, right? So $1,000 is the way that a SUNY school says, your kid did a really great job, and we appreciate that, and we want to help you. So what you see is what you get at a SUNY school. When you get your financial aid award letter back from them, and you're looking at tuition, fees, room, and board, that's pretty much what you're looking at. Now, with a private school, that's not always true, because almost no one is paying the sticker price for a private school. When you look in those glossy brochures and you see how much those schools cost and panic, I'm telling you the majority of students do not pay that, either through scholarship or other grants or payment. There's a lot of different ways that families end up not paying that, but we just don't know how to figure it out. And often we don't get to know this until deep in, especially if your kid's picking a school that has a decision date that isn't rolling admissions. Your kid is not going to know until March 1st or April 1st whether or not she's accepted to a particular school. How's she supposed to say yes or no if I don't have my financial aid information? Or worse, early action, early decision. Your early decision, you are saying to that school, basically, if you propose to me, I'll marry you. We can't say, if you propose to me and the ring is nice, I'll marry you, right? We can't say that with early decision. I'm not a big fan of early decision in that, for that particular reason. Early action is okay because it's not binding, but early decision, you really have to crunch your numbers ahead of time because you are signing a contract. It's not, nobody gets sued for it, but you are signing a contract that says your kid's going to say yes. And they give your child an advantage for doing that. So when you back out of it, it's not good. It's not good for Lynbrook because they will tend not to give other early decision to Lynbrook kids. And it's certainly not good for your own kid. I saw on a bulletin board when I walked in, like this giant list of scholarship websites. So I'm assuming that's somewhere on your website. If they're up on your bulletin board, I'm sure they're legitimate and perfectly safe. If you read about them in like the Penny Saver, if that's still a thing, or the Weekly Clipper, or whatever we get in the mail these days, if somebody's mailing you something to your home, I just say proceed with caution. There are a lot of people who are trying to take advantage of us because we're nervous. And so there are people who will charge a fee to help us find money. And that's counterintuitive. Why would I pay money to somebody to find me money? I'd rather give the money to my child so that she can go to that school. A little bit of money, if it's $100, knock yourself out, right? If you think that's reasonable for your family, fine. But I've seen them up as high as $3,000, $4,000 is what they'll charge. And that's crazy. A good one to just get your feet wet is the one that I put up there, which is student aid. It was on the list out there. That's how I know your list is good, is the studentaid.gov and scholarships. There's hundreds of thousands of scholarships on there. Some of them have to do with academics. Some of them have to do with talent. Some of them are just weird. I don't know if it's still there, but 3M used to have a scholarship that if your kid went to the prom dressed in something made out of duct tape, they got entered into a scholarship pool or something like that. Well, it's up to you. If that's your kid's jam, that's fine. But there are easier ways, in my humble opinion, to make money. That, my friends, is it in terms of what's out there from the federal government, the state government, and then the colleges themselves. The only other thing I will say, and a lot of first-time parents aren't aware of this. My own ex-husband wasn't aware of this when we were sending my first son to school. In his mind, you have to pay the tuition up front. In his mind, you get a bill, and let's say it's $30,000 a year. I got to pay $15,000 in the fall in one shot and $15,000 in the spring in one shot. And that's not how it works necessarily. You can do payment plans at the schools. They start asking for money in 10 payment plans even before your child goes there. Things are split. So it's still a scary number, but you're not doing it all in one fell swoop. So that's also something to think about. So next up is, when do I apply for this stuff? So those of you that are parents of seniors, this is your year. If there's anybody with juniors or sophomores who are just trying to get a head start, you don't have to do anything this year except for familiarize yourself. But for this year, it usually doesn't change that much year to year. If you were at this presentation last year, you're going to hear slightly different stuff as we talk about the form this year, because they actually did change it, but usually they don't. When do I want you to fill out your financial aid form? By New Year's Day. That's what I'm going to suggest to you. Don't read the deadline that's on the form, because it's going to tell you, you can even apply. I can have a kid right now enrolled at college who didn't apply for financial aid this year, and if she wants to tomorrow, she could, right? If the deadline hasn't passed yet. I can tell you that all that discretionary money is gone, right? We don't have any extra money left in the middle of the school year. What takes precedent is the college's deadline. And every college could have a different one. A college could say, if it's not in by February 1st, we don't consider you for scholarship or aid, if it's not in by a certain date. I tell you New Year's Day, really out of self-preservation, mostly for your kid. I want you to get the worst, most disgusting part of the college application process done in the first half of the senior year so that our kids can actually have a decent second half. These kids have been running at warp speed since sophomore, if not freshman year. Certainly the junior year is a killer, and we're torturing them now. Where are you going to apply? What are you going to do? We have to visit every weekend. We're doing all this kind of crazy stuff. It's nuts for them. So if you get this stuff out of the way and you're just waiting for answers back, your kid can go back to just being a high school student. You have the answers to the tests already. In the old days, you had to wait for your tax returns to be done so that you could fill it out. They do something now where they look 2 years back. So in order to fill out the financial aid form for the 24-25 school year, you're going to be using your 2022 tax returns. You'll have done them. You have them already. So you know the answers to be able to fill this out. So it's not crazy to think that you could get this done. You can't go online right this minute to fill out the form because the government, for whatever reason, didn't open the form yet for 24-25. My deadline used to be Thanksgiving because it used to open somewhere in October. It's not, I checked right before I came here, it's still not live, the 24-25. It said it's going to go up in December, but it's not up yet. So keep checking. But you can fill out the form once that goes live, and you don't have to fill it all out in one step. You can save and go back to it. You can make changes. Up until you hit submit, you're free to come and go as you please and make changes as you please. So the question for those online is that all you need is your tax returns? Pretty much. The government is going to ask this year about 46 questions, which I can't believe I'm saying is so good. Because when I filled it out for my first child, there were over 135 questions. And then it slowly has been whittling. This is the smallest it's been. And it's a smart form now, where depending upon how you answer one question, it may or may not show you a particular question, which is nice as you're going through this. The majority of the answers are going to come when you click a button that says, retrieve my information from the IRS, which used to be optional, and this year is not. And so, because you've done those taxes, or they want to catch you if you didn't. And so you're going to hit that button. It's going to pull in anything you need from the tax returns. There are some questions that ask that you'll need your bank statements, that you're going to need some investments. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. So the FAFSA form, FAFSA, by the way, stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So it's free. You don't pay to submit the FAFSA form. And there are a lot of tricksters out there. Sometimes if you type in FAFSA.com, you get taken away to a site that is a for-profit place, and they'll say, sure, pay $50 and we'll process your form. That's fake. So the website that you can go to is, I tell you to go to FAFSA.gov. There's a longer one, but FAFSA.gov is a shortcut, and it'll get you right to the homepage, what we're looking at right here. So you get to the homepage, and both you and your child play a part in the FAFSA process. The majority of our kids are dependent in the eyes of the federal government. So obviously, they're relying on us for funding, and so we have to give parent information. More about that in just a minute. But the very first thing is the government assumes that it's going to be the kid that's coming to the computer first, and whenever they use the word you, they mean the student. They do not mean the parent, right? And so they're asking this question right at the start, who are you? Are you the student? Are you a parent filling it out? Or even though Jackie said don't do it, are you a preparer who's being paid to fill this form out for you, right? So once you say who you're about, the next thing you're going to be asked to do is to create what's called an FSA ID. Basically, it's your PIN code for FAFSA, right? You pick, I don't know if it's 4 digits or 6 digits at this point, but you make one up that's comfortable for you, and that's the way you electronically sign. That's how you can get in and out as you need to, and make changes as you go. Both you and your child need their own unique PIN code. in order to access the information. Oops. It will then, this is why this is important and why I circled it. If you go to the website right now, you're going to see dates that are not the dates you need. You are going to see, if I can read without my glasses here, you're going to see the 23, 24, and 22, 23 forms up there. Be careful, because if you start filling out the 23, 24 form, which is a logical mistake, you click it and you think that's the year we're in, I'll fill that one out, your information is going to go nowhere. The colleges aren't going to get it. The federal government doesn't know how to process it for the year that you want. So you're always looking for 24, 25. I'm going to say that enough tonight that it's annoying, but it's so that you can really make sure that you're filling out the correct form. So you're going to pick which button. Your button isn't there, but I promise sometime in December it will be. And then it starts to ask some basic questions. You've made up that key, so it asks you for that PIN code key that you put in, and now it's going to start taking you through the FAFSA form itself. It's funny, what do they need? We kind of covered that already. The only other thing that we didn't talk about is you have to be a citizen or an eligible non-citizen in order to qualify for financial aid. So you might need proof of something like that. You're going to need bank statements, but otherwise you have what you need. If you want to say, my kid is turning 18, I love him, but I don't want to be financially responsible for him. He should be independent at this point. The government tells us it's not that easy to get rid of our kids. And so they have very specific criteria by which a kid is considered independent. You don't have to read that fine print. It'll be up there. I promise you're going to probably say no to every single one. Is your child 24 or older? Married? Does she have dependents other than a spouse? Is she a veteran of the armed forces? Is she a ward of the court? Like, it's that stuff. So it's really more extreme circumstances. Majority of our kids are going to be considered dependent. And so once they answer this question, the parent section of the form is going to come up. And it's going to say to your child, go get your parent to come sit down and fill this out. That's the point when you stop pretending to be your kid and you actually start being you. Very few places I actually recommend that we do the work for the student, like college applications, no way, and all of that stuff. Financial aid, I get it. But keep them part of the conversation is my suggestion, but they don't know how to fill this out. They're not as comfortable with the terminology. If we're uncomfortable, they're even worse as they go through it. There's a brand new form, a brand new word this year called contributor. Who fills out financial information on the FAFSA? It used to be the custodial parent. It used to be who's paying for this kid, right? So it's the parents if they're married, it's a single parent if they never were married, and then in a divorce situation, it used to be who's the one that the child lives with more than 50% of the time and receives at least 50% of support from. They changed it, and now they made the word contributor. And so you're going to see on here, they're going to get more nosy. They will ask questions in a divorce situation about that, who's contributing. If a grandma is contributing, theoretically, you're supposed to put that down on the form this year. You do with that information what you want. It does not mean that the contributor is financially responsible. The government's just trying to see what's out there. What are they looking at? And what do you have access to should you choose to take advantage of it? So I don't know how colleges are going to look at this. We've never had this happen like this before. So be patient with the colleges that you're applying to, because we're trying to figure it out also for all of our students. And all the students that are currently at school are being flipped over to this too. So it's not just the incoming class that has this drama, it's every student in college that's going to have this drama for the next year. We talked a little bit about custodial parents and stuff. Who's the parent, right? In a married situation, it's mom and dad, and both parents' income and asset information appears. In a divorce, as we just talked about, it used to be, and you'll still fill this out, the custodial parent, who does the kid live with most of the time and receive most support for. But it also includes, let's say mom gets remarried to stepdad. Stepdad's income and asset information shows up on this form, even if that's not the deal they made when they got remarried. He was supposed to take care of his, she was going to take care of hers. That's how they were going to do things. Now, stepdad is a contributor, even if all he's contributing is a roof over the head and the bills that he pays for that roof over the head. He is a contributor in the new definition of things. So you'll read that a little bit more carefully and see how that plays out for your family. I actually had somebody ask me once if it's a mistake to get remarried at the point that your kids are going to college. And I told her that that is a whole other seminar. But for financial aid purposes, I wouldn't recommend it. That's just me. But don't get divorced just because of that. That's not going to help you either. You can't win, right? So for dependent students, we talked about this already. Now, it used to have a section that I crossed out up there that would say you could either go get a copy of your tax return and manually put in your information, and you had the option of pushing the IRS retrieval tool, but now they took that away. So this year's form is going to say, click here to retrieve through the IRS. So we shouldn't see, I haven't seen the new form yet, but we shouldn't see that section showing up. So you'll pull your data in and you'll double check it, just make sure. Computers do occasionally make mistakes, not all the time, but sometimes. What else are they going to ask about? This is the big guy, right? There's questions on that that are going to ask you and your child in separate sections of the form, how much cash, checking, and what's the value of your cash, checking, and savings accounts. If you're like me, my checking account looks good for 20 minutes a month. I get paid, I deposit my check, I feel very rich, I drive through Starbucks and I get my $7 cup of coffee. And then I sit down at my kitchen table and I start paying bills and I think I gotta start making my own coffee. Nowhere on the FAFSA form are we trying to impress the federal government with how rich we feel on that ride home from a bank, right? So you're not bragging. However, it is possible for a college randomly, or the government randomly, to say, give me 6 months worth of your bank statements. Let's just do a quick double check. And so you want it to be reasonably close. It's your money, you could take it out for things, but you might have to document, right? So if you had $20,000 in a bank account, but you had it there for a roof on your house, you wouldn't put the $20,000 down because you know in the next few months, it's going to be for the roof. And if you got audited, you'd be able to demonstrate, here's the bill for the roof. Come over if you want to come see my roof in person. I paid for a roof for it. Cash, they do mean cash. So you're supposed to count up all the money you have hidden throughout your house and under your mattresses and throw it in there. Real estate, but not your primary home. So if you're lucky enough to own the home that you live in, they are not asking us to give the value of our primary home. That's a bummer on Long Island because our homes are worth a lot, but we owe a lot on them. So it would be nice to be able to tell that story. But in the government's mind, we choose to own a home. That's an option that we've chosen. We didn't have to do that. When they talk real estate, they're talking a second home, they're talking rental properties, they're not talking timeshares, they're not talking, usually your vacation villa kind of things. But if you have a vacation home, a true second home that you own, you are supposed to talk about the net value of that. Then there's oodles of questions: CDs, stocks, stock options, bonds, money market funds, mutual funds, 529 plans, and they put the other word, etc. That covers them in case they forgot to mention anything. If it's a savings vehicle for either you or your child, they are asking about it. Just because they're asking about it does not mean they're going to expect you to cash in your IRA, does not mean they're going to ask you to cash in every CD or stock that you have. Again, they're trying to get the landscape of what's going on here. Nowhere on this form, nowhere are you going to put the total value of your IRA, a 403B, a 401k, those legitimate retirement vehicles. Nowhere on the form are you going to put the total value. What they are asking is, in the year that just ended, how much every paycheck were you diverting to that? So just in that 1 year, if every month or every time you got paid, you were putting $250 into this thing, not what your company was matching if you're lucky enough to have them match it, just what were you taking out of your account, that's what you're going to be talking about. And that's not because they wish that you were paying them instead of yourselves in that circumstance. That's going to check and balance why your adjusted gross income is different than your income earned from work, right? So there's a lot of double checking, asking questions multiple ways to just make sure that they didn't miss anything on here. You had a quick question?
Yeah, so the 529 plan, is that for all kids or just?
It's a great question. So the question was the 529 plans, is that for all kids or just the kid that's applying? And the question that you didn't ask, but that I'll encourage you to think about too, is does it live in the kid's name, on the kid's side of the form, or on the parent's side of the form? A 529 plan is a parent asset, even though it's in the kid's name. Until such time as you cash it in and give the money to that kid, you could roll it over to another kid if you want. You could give it to a nephew. You could use it for yourself if you go back to school. It's your fund until you give it over. So it lives on the parent's side of the form, not the child's. And yes, they are asking now this year for all of them, for all children that you have. And again, it's not necessarily because they want you to cash it in completely. This is a harder one because it's a college savings plan and you're sending a kid to college. So you're going to have some explaining to do about why you don't want to use that money in particular. Not all of it. Like if you have $20,000 in it, they don't expect you to take $20,000 out in the first year and then you have nothing. But they are hoping maybe you'll contribute something each year that your kid is in school from that fund in order to be able to make it happen. So, and again, we talked about it's just contributions to IRAs. Nowhere are you asked if you have a pension. You're not asked the total value of your pension anywhere on here. There are untaxed income questions that if you earn untaxed income for any reason, a mom that used to sell Pampered Chef, she was like a Pampered Chef lady, and she got paid without paying taxes. And so she had to, on her own, ethically figure out what taxes she owed at the end of the year. They would be asking for her untaxed income here. How do you live? Well, I live off of this money, and she would have to demonstrate and fill that out there. So you just do the best you can in filling out the form with what you know. Any other questions about what's on the form before we talk about what happens when we submit it? So the question is, what about if grandparents have a 529 plan or a savings account or anything like that in the child's name? Shh. Nowhere on the form does it say, how much does grandma have? Now, you could choose in this year to put grandma as a contributor if she's going to contribute. If grandma lives in your home, you might need to include her as a contributor, but that fund is grandma's fund.
So the 529 plan that the grandparent has is she's not a contributor.
This year, we're going to have to read very carefully what they're talking about. I think they're going to make grandma a contributor if she lives in the home. Or like if there's a deeper bond than just taking it out in your name. But we're going to have to see. They're still working through.
Any family member that set up their own 509 that is not required, not real money.
That's the way I filled it out for my kids. That's what I'll tell you, right? And so 40% of all kids who apply for financial aid are randomly audited. And the government just asks for some backup data and they just check and balance. The 529 is not one of the check and balance items. It's just not. So when we do an audit, so do it to the best of your ability, right? If you sincerely, like I did, believe that 529 that my grandmother took out for my child is her fund, I didn't include it on the form. That's just me. You do you.
Are short-term annuities, like 4-year, 5-year, like S&P index annuities, is that considered?
It's considered an investment, and so you'd have to look at, the question was about S&P annuities and stuff like that. It's considered an investment, so you'd be figuring out the net value of it if you were to sell it tomorrow or, liquidate it tomorrow, what would you likely get for that? All right, so we submit the form. We hit submit, and you're going to watch for a reply from the federal government. Sometimes it comes automatically. Sometimes you'll get, thank you very much, your form has been successfully submitted. Start checking your emails, in a few days for more detailed information. When you put an email on the financial aid forms or even on college applications, I don't know about you, my kids do not, well, my older kids do, but certainly my 22-year-old daughter does not check her email when she was a college student, ever. The college one maybe because her professors would write to her on it, but she wasn't paying any attention to what colleges were sending her when she was a senior in high school or any of that stuff. We created an email account specifically called Jess's College Email. And we both had access to it. And so I could get in there and look at it, but I didn't have to see any other nonsense in case there was any other nonsense in there. So I strongly encourage you to do that for both financial aid purposes and application purposes, because we don't want to ride them all the time. We want them to be responsible, but sometimes they need help being responsible. But you're going to get an email to that, whatever email address you put down. And then you have to take a look at it and check it, make sure that they got everything right. One question I want to talk about here is, what if in 2022, both parents were working, the income was super high, and now in this year, somebody got laid off, there's been a divorce, somebody retired, there's been a significant income change. You still, when you hit the data retrieval tool, are going to pull in how it looked back then. After the government has processed the application, after you get that email that says, here's how your financial aid looks from the federal government, and after the college has said, you're welcome to attend our school, we admit you, we've accepted you, then and only then you start telling your story. Up until that point, until a college has offered you a place in their incoming class, they can't even see any of your financial information. We can't pull it into our databases, the FAFSA, until we've said we accept this kid. And that's to prevent us from only admitting kids that can afford us. If they have a supplemental form, that's a whole other ball game. But for the FAFSA, they're not. And so that's just one other thing to keep in mind. You would tell your story. How do you tell your story? Write a letter, or like an essay almost. I see it, an essay almost. Here's everything that happened. If somebody was retired or somebody got laid off, you're going to document that. You're going to pull pay stubs together, and then you're going to build. And you have to send it to each individual school that your child is accepted to. And it's up to each individual school to figure out how they're going to process that. We just talked about this. So there's one other big change this year. In the past, what the government was doing when they took your financial aid form and processed it, they were coming up with something called the Expected Family Contribution, or EFC. This was the minimum amount that the government says you could afford to pay for your kid as a family. It doesn't mean you actually could, but that's what the government thinks you could. It was called an estimated family contribution. People were complaining, appropriately so, because those numbers aren't always realistic. And so what they think we can afford and what we think are very different, so they flipped it. And they now are going to be producing something called a student aid index. And this is going to look more so at sort of your financial situation and how much trouble financially you would have paying for something. It's supposed to be better for us. This could even be a negative number this year. I don't know what that's going to look like, right? So in the past, an EFC was either 0 up to $99,999. Now it can be negative up to negative 4,000. So colleges, their brains are exploding, because we now have to change everything in our systems about how to give out aid. What does that mean, minus 3,000? And how is that different from the way we used to award our monies. So I'm just going to predict that some colleges are going to take longer to send financial aid information to us because of that. But maybe some of them are on the ball and they're going to do it. But anyway, if you had a kid, an older kid, that went to college and you're looking for that EFC, you're not going to see it anymore. You're just going to see this SAI. They're still going to ask how many members in your household are in college. So if you have 2 kids in college, 3 kids in college, but your answer doesn't get factored into that student aid index, which is a bummer. The EFC, if you had 2 kids in college, they would say, good, that splits your available, money in half. Now your debt theoretically, or the hole you're in theoretically comes from having 2 kids in college, so it doesn't factor twice. Why they're changing that, I'm not really sure, and what impact that's going to have, not really sure. So then how are colleges going to figure out how much you're actually going to get? We first figure out the cost of education. How much do we actually cost? Tuition, fees, room and board, and then we add a little cushion. We might add transportation allowance, we might add a computer allowance, we might add personal expenses, because we know that it's more than just what tuition, room and board is. That's the cost of attendance. In the past, we would subtract the EFC from that number, and then that would give us your unmet need. Now, we're going to probably have to look at how your SAI, Student Aid Index, stacks up against our cost. So I don't know what that's going to look like yet. It's going to bring it down, obviously, but I just don't know what that will ultimately look like. They did this to make life easier for us. It will be easier in 2 or 3 years. It's always the first year of change. When they first switched over to looking back 2 years instead of 1 year, it was a nightmare. It took a little bit longer, and now everybody is grateful that that happened because it makes it easier for families too. So you just have the good fortune of being in that mix-up. Schools are going to look, and we talked about this, they don't have to meet your unmet need, but private schools are going to try to throw some money in there if they can to try to close the gap. And once you decide which school your child is going to attend, they help you through the whole rest of the financial aid and scholarship process. This form, the FAFSA form, is the scariest because you are not married to a college yet. And so you can't be handheld through it. Once your child's accepted, that school's going to say, here, fill this out, send it back, fill this out, send it back, and it gets a lot more straightforward. Last topic I want to talk about is, can you haggle with these people? And I think these people are financial aid people at the colleges. Can you call them up and say, hey, the school down the street is giving my kid $10,000 more than you are. If you want my kid, show me the money. No, not quite like that. That's not quite like it works. On average, kids apply to 10 to 12 schools. It used to be 6 to 8. Now, on average, 10 to 12. That's a lot of schools for you to kind of go through. It's like when you flip through a magazine and you flip past the ads so fast. Colleges do not want to be so ridiculously undervaluing that you just put us immediately in a no pile. So most colleges are trying to put their best foot forward. They're going to tell you what they really think is the most that they can award your child at that point. The only time, I think there are 2 things, if you know 2 things, I could say you can call a school. If you're down to your last 2 schools, it's between 2 schools, maybe 3. And you are within spitting distance of being able to make it work for that school. It's a good idea, maybe, to call one of those schools and say, hey, listen, this is her top choice. She really wants to go there. We're running a little bit shy of being able to make it work. Is there anything we overlooked? That's a perfectly reasonable call to make. You have to know how much you need and ask for how much you need. You don't just ask for more, because they will take 2 weeks, 3 weeks to look for more. They will call you back and they will say, great news, we found you $500 and you needed $5,000. So really know how much you need, because it's going to slow things down. And then the other thing is, know what you're going to do if they give it to you or if they don't, because that money has a time a time ticker with it. Because might have you have them here probably at graduation too, one-time funds in memory of someone or a local business. You only have one of each. Colleges have that too. That's what we use, and they're smaller amounts. And we get to know the student a little bit better, and we might be able, you major in this, we might be able to give you something like that. But if you don't take it, we want to give it to somebody else so that we don't lose the opportunity. So if you know how much you need, I need $1,500, and if they give me $1,500, I'm gonna send her, do it. If you know you need $1,500 and they don't give you $1,500, you're gonna still send her to that school, you're gonna make it work some other way, fine. If you need $1,500 and they don't give you $1,500 and you can't send her to that school, no problem, you just go to the next school on your list. But it's all going to happen so compressed that you need to kind of think that through. You don't want to be calling 10 schools and playing them against each other. It's a nightmare. For you, not for us, for you, to figure that out. All right. You are not richer as we get to the end of this. I don't have a bucket of cash to give out as a prize to say goodbye. I am giving you my email address. That's my real email address. And if you, in the subject line, just put Lynbrook follow-up question, write to me. I'm not going to tell you how to hide your money. I'm not going to tell you how to, if I knew, believe me, I would have used it for myself. But sometimes it makes sense to you while you're sitting here, but then you sit down at the computer and it goes out of your head. The purpose of doing that is for you to get comfortable asking financial aid questions. And then hopefully, if I don't know the answer, I'll put you in touch with somebody at your kid's school who can, because they really do want to help you. They want your child to come. Once they've offered your kid acceptance, they want your kid to come. They're going to work hard to help you make that happen. Questions? Yes? So the question is, and I'll repeat it just for online, is how does, if the parent went to college some period of time ago and has her own debt, she owes her own student loans out there, how does that get factored in? Not easily. It's not an asset, so you're not going to be talking about it in assets. It's no longer an investment. It doesn't count as an investment. You may be able to speak about it in these new SAI as a debt, because I think they are going to ask some more questions about outstanding debts. That would be nice. That would be nice if they did. Anything else? Oh, you're so cute that you asked that question. The question was, you apply for this just one time and then you're done. No. Every year, you fill out the financial aid form, and you do it for each of your kids. It does get easier, I promise, because what happens the next year you do it is it pre-populates all the stuff you answered, right? And then all you're doing is just double checking. This one is the hardest one because you're doing it all for the first time. But the next time you do it, it's in there and you're just double checking that nothing really changed. And you do it every single year. And that's a good thing, honestly, because finances do swing year to year. You could have a really good year, and then the next year commissions just weren't what they were, or whatever your situation is, and you need to be able to tell that story. So that's why they do it every single year.
And so, just from what I was reading compared to last year and this year, and I don't know if you talked about it, but it was, when should you use certain assets to start paying for college, so the 529?
So the question is, when should you use certain assets to pay for, college? I am not a financial advisor, and I don't feel comfortable answering that question specifically. What I will say, we were talking about this right before the program starts, some financial advisors will say, listen, you don't get to talk about your debt on a FAFSA form. So if you have high credit card bills, if you owe a lot of money, take money out of your savings and pay it down. Okay, but what if I need my savings for other things, right? So you don't make financial aid decisions unless they're the right real life decisions for you. If you were already going to do something, sure, do it. But I don't recommend necessarily. A 529 plan is specifically for college. So you can decide. I mean, you can either say, I want to take the hit in the freshman year and pay for it up front and save that for later, or I want to save it for graduate school. That's going to be different for every family. There is no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong to doing it.
Are you familiar with the Excelsior Scholarship?
Yes.
What is the basics of that?
So I know enough to be dangerous about Excelsior. That's through New York State. And if I'm not mistaken, it's income-based. There's an income cutoff for it. I don't know what that dollar amount is, but it's pretty specific. Do you know, Mrs. Muller? 125. For a family of four? Right.
We don't know that until late next year, like in April up to.
Same with TAP, by the way. You're applying for the state grant before the state budget is approved. And so anything you get from a college until the state budget is approved is an estimate, because we don't know if it's really going to pass and go through the same. Excelsior, if I'm also not mistaken, has a residency requirement, which means they need to stay in New York State for a period of years working after they receive that, or it flips to a loan and you have to pay it back.
So when would you, if that's something that works for you, when would you apply for that?
So anywhere from April to June.
You can't even apply until June. I didn't
No.
say the answer.
But you can go online now on the New York State HESC website, go to Excelsior, and you put on the right side there, top where you put your email address in, and it'll say, sign now, and we'll tell you as soon as it's out. So I sign up every year, just so that when they go to me, then I can notify you guys, but put your email address in it too. It's been random months.
So for the folks on the, that are watching online, bottom line is you can go to the HESC website, you can take a look at the Excelsior section. Right now, the application isn't up yet. Somewhere after April, it will be up there. So fill out the little email box and they'll let you know. They'll notify you. Higher Education Services Corporation. We love an acronym. We love it. You know, HESC, it's New York State's fund, yeah. If you just type into Google, application for Excelsior, it'll take you there. I love Google. Anything else, guys? It is really hot in here, right? I'm not having some sort of attack? Okay, good. Because it's like 10,000 degrees, and I'm thinking like, I don't usually get nervous. Is this like what it feels like to have an anxiety attack? All right, good luck, everybody. Good luck to people online. I don't know how to end this.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Wow, it's warm in here. How do kids stay awake?
I don't know, I was just falling asleep, but that was.
Good, I'm glad. I feel like I've seen you guys somewhere. I used to live in the 5 towns, but now I live down by